When you don't see yourself being represented in cinema or on camera, that does something on a subconscious level. And I know that that did to me, where I said, why am I not being seen? Why do I not see myself in these things that people are watching? Does that mean something's wrong with me? Hey, I'm Max Skaff. I'm a filmmaker, writer, visual artist. I love painting, tattoos, and I use he and they pronouns, and I identify as a queer transmasculine person. I would say my profession is a lot of fun. It's all about expression and creativity and teamwork. I identify like where my ethnicity, I'm half Lebanese and half German, and I do identify a lot with specifically the Lebanese culture because I think culturally I saw, you know, all the authentic foods we used to eat and the language and all of those traditions kind of die out. So I think especially as an adult, I've kind of gravitated towards learning more about that side of my culture and that side of my history.
And can you talk a little bit about what your community was like growing up, both in West Virginia and in New York?
Yeah, so growing up in West Virginia, I knew I was a trans man. I didn't have that vocabulary at the time, but I knew I was a trans man. I knew I was a boy since I was 4 years old. I very clearly remember that as one of the first things that I do remember, but I did not have any other visual representation or humans in my life that were representative of the experience that I was having inside of myself. And what was cool was that my parents, they let me be a boy. You know, I wore boy clothes. I didn't want no Barbies, no American Girl. No, I want Legos. I want, you know, well, we didn't really have video games. I like Playmobiles. I like that. Then I went through puberty and kind of everything changed from there. You know, the first two trans people that I remember seeing there was one transgender woman in my town growing up and everybody laughed at her. Then my other trans person was about 20 years after that. And he was a trans masked guy, about 10 years older than me. He had transitioned a long time in the 80s. They both died tragic deaths. It took me a long time to make sense of those deaths, but also subconsciously it kept me, I don't want to say closeted, but like I couldn't feel free to be myself for a very, very long time. But when I moved to Brooklyn, that's when I think I really started to express how I wanted to look, how I wanted to dress, my pronouns. I remember my first film job, actually. I was a production assistant for this Australian filmmaker. And they were doing a whole trans film. And not about a subject that was tragic. I was used to seeing Boys Don't Cry in the 90s, and I said, oh my God, I'm Tina Brandon, that's me. But then they die. I remember 15, 20 years after that, the first L Word come out. They got their trans character. I said, well, I don't want to be that. All the lesbians hate him, and they making fun. So being on this set with the Australian filmmaker, and we were interviewing all these trans masked people, and when I got to see other trans people that were experiencing joy and happiness and living purpose and living normal lives, because I didn't see that. I saw tragedy and violence. That was so important to me because at that time, my roommate was trans masked. You know, he had a lot of trauma and he eventually, you know, overdosed. When I was in my early 20s, I started to identify as, you know, we called it genderqueer back then. And everything leading to my medical transition was just like very much baby steps. Baby step, baby step, baby step, baby step. Because it's like, oh no, you're so unapologetic you. And I said, I still feel like a fraud, man. Like, I still feel like a fraud sometimes, you know? When I transitioned medically and changed my name and my pronouns, and it felt so good because I had never identified as a lesbian. I used that term because I felt like I had to, And I didn't know, I didn't have the language at that time from like a non-binary spectrum either. When I finally, medically transitioned, which was something that, not all trans people want to do that or need to do that, but that was something that I chose to do for myself because I had this kind of bottoming out inside of my body. I love my body today. I wake up and I don't even think about it. And then I can look in the mirror today and be like, oh, you're sexy. I'll never say that to myself before. So the Australian filmmaker is Sophie Hyde, and they have a trans masc child who's trans masc non-binary. And so they were in Brooklyn actually doing research for a film called 52 Tuesdays, which is about the relationship between a trans masc parent and their child who's also going through their own things in sexuality in school. So they were in Brooklyn doing research, and their child, they were, I think, about 8 years old then, and I was identifying as genderqueer and coming to terms with my masculinity, and this child saw me and wanted the same shoes as me. We was picking up rocks in the park and, doing all these like super queer things together with this kid, and it was just like so amazing too. And they thanked me, and I thanked them, and I just seen Sophie. They premiered their film at Tribeca, and I hadn't seen them in 10 years. And Sophie was like, thank you so much for like being that person to my trans child. And I was like, no, but like, actually thank you, because you guys introduced me to all of these trans masc people who had magazine, Original Plumbing, Rocco Catastrophe, who were such pioneers for trans masc people in terms of resources and just general education through the magazines they were creating, the publications they were creating. That was just another step in my process of opening that door even wider.
Do you remember kind of where your interest in filmmaking started, and can you talk about that?
I always made movies and stories since I was a kid. I was always writing stories. And I remember getting my first video camera. It was like a mini DV tape, and I took it everywhere with me. Like, we were causing scenes in the local mall, and it was fun. And I said, I want to do this forever. I only want to make art. You know what I mean? It was never even kind of a question in my mind, because it was something I needed to do. I needed to express myself, and I continue to need to express myself because I do believe that what I do in terms of my current work, which is telling trans stories, that's my purpose. And I know that that's my purpose because anytime that I have shared openly, like genuinely from my heart, like people listen and people respond. That's why we're here today telling these stories. I believe that yes, those movie and television that I previously talked about, sure, they were tragic, and that is a reality for our community. But also, I wanted to take a new route and take power into my own hands, and I think a lot of other queer creators are doing this now, where we're trying to normalize ourselves. I do a lot of my expression and a lot of my healing and a lot of my reflection through writing, so I just wrote a whole screenplay, a whole queer, trans erotica. And I remember I was watching this Netflix documentary, and I seen Erica Lust, and she was talking about all these feminist concepts and kind of taking our power back as, vagina owners. And so I just literally hit her up. I was like, yo, I wrote this, and she just gave me money to make her first trans film on her platform, and I continued from there. And I think that showcasing trans bodies, nude trans bodies, is extremely important because people don't know what different bodies look like. And I remember one of my films was playing at House of Yes in Brooklyn. And there was this cis, like a bro, like a hetero bro. And I remember watching him and seeing his face when he saw, two trans people, and he couldn't handle it, and he was like, this is gross, and he left, and his girlfriend was like, yeah, don't be rude, I said, they gonna be, and I loved it because I said, number one, they're gonna be fighting later. Number two, I took that as one of my biggest forms of success because I blew somebody's mind up enough that they had to physically exit. That's power. Also, porn that I make is educational. I think, first of all, the sex education in general in this country is whack, and it does not come from a feminist lens, it does not come from a queer lens, it comes from a very hetero and Puritan lens. So where are kids getting their education from? From free tube sites, Pornhub. It is not realistic. You're not seeing a variety of bodies, you're seeing people being fetishized, you're seeing male pleasure. When I first picked up my first mini DV tape, I taught myself everything. I remember I had this weird ass editing program that I had to be glitching and putting a weird watermark on it. Like, it was like totally wacko. But then I studied college. I went to art school at Pratt in Brooklyn. And I did study film there, but that was a different decade. You know, we were still working with film where our teacher was, you know, making us load big film cameras blindfolded and shit. We're not using none of that today, you know what I'm saying? Most of my education came from being on set and having hands-on experience from other people, and I believe that is still true today. My senior year, when DSLRs that were shooting 1920 by 1080 HD came out, and this technology became more available on a consumer level. You know, you had HD quality for a fraction of the price of what, you know, these big commercials or movies were shooting on. And that made things a lot more accessible, as we're seeing today with, you know, influencers on YouTube. Me evolving with technology is I did start on that 1920 HD DSLR. And then from there, when 4K came out and I had already had experience on set, and I said, hey, I want to graduate cameras. I'm learning new cameras. I'm always learning new cameras because these cameras are gonna keep updating and having different features. And I mean, exposure is exposure. F-stop's f-stop. You did your ISO, you know, those technical aspects are the same, but the technology is always going to be shifting. And I think continued education in the film industry is really important. And I don't need to go to graduate school for that. I can go on YouTube. My continued education, I watch a lot of animation. Also learning new programs is important. Like, I started editing on Final Cut, and when Apple upgraded and made it look like iMovie, and I said, what? You know, and then I moved to Premiere. Sure, some things are the same, but a lot of things are different as well, and software is always gonna update as well. I remember when I first got my first DSLR and I was shooting 1920 1080 HD, and my mind was blown because I came from just glitchy looking lines through it, like VHS video looking, Super 8. I saw this clear image in my hands and high quality, and I said, whoa, it felt powerful to me, you know, to be able to achieve that type of quality. I believe it made my work better because I was able to get to film festivals, which was something that is still important for me today, is networking. The film industry that I first started in is a boys club. And I remember being on set, having men try to pick things up for me, and I'm like, what? No. I didn't see other queer people on sets. I didn't, especially no trans people. And so I especially put trans people on my sets, and I love putting women on cameras. A lot of times in this man's world, which is still the majority of the film industry, women are not given the same opportunities either. But I think giving people those opportunities that are especially underrepresented people is just so important. And also, like, I like to invite people on my set that maybe don't have a lot of experience, because it was so important for people above me to educate me in a kind manner, and in a respectful manner, and in a patient manner. And I believe that passing that down is my responsibility as a queer person in a leadership role. It's my responsibility, and I take it serious. It's important for queer directors to direct queer films because that's our direct experience, you know, and that will translate onto the final footage. And it's important for queer people to tell queer stories because those are our stories. And we're trying to represent us in a more empowering manner. And I think that I'm open, as a director, I am open to collaboration. Sure, I come onto set with an idea of what I want, but I also like to freestyle and play off the seat of my pants, you know? Like if we see in something or, you know, maybe the actor, what I wrote doesn't necessarily fit their personality, I wanna fit their personality and how they're gonna be able to come off most natural, because at the end of the day it's like that actor, they bring themselves into it as well. So it is a collaborative process. I didn't feel comfortable in certain jobs at first, and I will specifically talk about an experience of a job that I had that was a permalance gig where I was in charge of this like rich New York City ballet, Upper East Side, ballerinas video content where we were shooting like mass production of these like ballet exercise videos. And I remember walking into this studio, you know, I was there 3 days a week, and you know, there's all these Victoria's Secret models, and it's this very pristine hetero white world, and seeing all these Victoria's Secret models, blockbuster actresses, and then I come in, I'm this like tattooed like butch lesbian with cat hair and a potty mouth, and I felt like I had to hide myself. In the past, like it would take me a very long time to really come out of my shell. And I'm talking like 6 months to a year to really start to be myself, especially from that job. I had already had all these subconscious things inside of myself of the brainwashing that society had put on me in the past of saying who you are is not okay for a general audience. Tone it down. I actually took my power back in that job as well. I started being loud and I started being more queer. And when I started to bring my true energy out, people responded to that in a positive manner. Instead of me going like this, like trying to hide myself and isolate myself. Why am I separating myself from even cis or hetero people? You know, when that is also a legitimate connection where we can share each other's stories, share each other's experiences, and that is how we bring more love and acceptance into the world, because ignorance breeds hate. I think that a lot of us and that are leaders in the queer and LGBT world are already making a lot of moves in these last years to be inclusive to our own community, because it's our community that ultimately saved us as well. And when we pass on those stories, it's also important to pass these stories on to cis, hetero, white people that are in positions of power, because they need to know about this stuff too. How are they supposed to make changes if they don't know? You know, so it's not even in our own community, but it is global. This whole educational process, I think that just comes from representation, telling queer stories, telling queer experiences, and humanizing the queer experience in general. I'm telling you, I still will walk on a set and as a camera guy, and I'm with other cis hetero white guys. When I'm curating a set, I want women. I want queer people. I want people who are immigrants. And there's still this hierarchy that really does exist, I would say, especially in the commercial world. And it definitely still is a like a white boy world, especially I would say in the more technical departments. Lighting, camera, leave the makeup and the styling for the ladies, or the gay men or whatever. And they don't even realize they're doing it, because that's how much the patriarchy is ingrained inside of the industry and inside of society in general, I think. My experience as a trans person and everything that I've had to go through directly correlates to my work. We are survivors, and me reaching lows in my life of isolation and discrimination, and I was beat up myself, and like having to overcome those things and empower myself and take my power back after, you know, trauma happens or tragedy happens, that is directly flows into my writing. It flows into my work of creating love and healing experiences. I've had a lot of things in my career that I've been proud of, especially like with film festivals, I would say, and winning awards at film festivals, and just honestly being a part of community and seeing how people respond to my films. Like when we're in a theater and I pay attention, I'm like, where are the parts that people are laughing? Where are the parts that you see somebody's eyes get wide or you hear something? I actually been writing a book for 3 years and I'm pretty much finished with it. I have like 150 more pages to edit, but it's a memoir and it's called Boyhood. It goes from boyhood to being a prepubescent female with a period and growing tits, and you know, then going back to boyhood and then reaching this stage of manhood that I had always wanted, but then realizing I don't want to be a man at all. You know what I mean? And it's like going back to queering it up and taking full, because that was never my intention, was to pass. Sure, I have a privilege of passing, and not all queer people want to pass. You know, we are so flowy and we are so good at working on that spectrum. And you know, what I love about being queer and being in the queer community is our expression. And when we're together and we got crazy costumes and we're painting our nails and we're just being unapologetic with our style and our identities. Honestly, if you don't have the money to go to a private art school, or you don't have the scholarship or whatever, be a PA, get on a set, get your hands on cameras and equipment and lighting, because when you are on a set, no matter what job you're doing, you're gonna pick up the lingo, you're gonna start knowing the settings, you're gonna start seeing how producing and interviewing works. And I believe that is true for a lot of art career in general. I would say start by doing some research, and there's a ton of production companies. And I think especially as an LGBT person as well, is now that I'm in a position where I can be a leader and I can hire crew on my sets, I give queer people those jobs. You know, that's my #1 priority, because I remember being on one of my first sets and getting mansplained to and being rude. And so part of what I like to do is creating a safe environment and a pleasant place to go to work. And so I would say to somebody that, you know, maybe do some research and reach out to people, go to a film festival, see if there's any community screenings in your area, any Q&A panels. Go up to these people and saying, hey, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I'm looking to grow in. And there's people out there, there's so many people out there that are gonna give you that opportunity. There's a lot of LGBT owned and operated production companies. And because film technologically is so much more accessible, we have entrepreneurs that are LGBT that's building their own teams with our own community, and we all on the same page. We show up today, we on the same page already. You know what I mean? And also, like, what I like to do on sets as well, especially on when we are shooting erotic content and intimate content, is take a break in the beginning of the day. Get everybody together and go around and say your name and your pronouns and something about yourself, you know, just to like warm that space up. Do a meditation, get hippie with it. Advice that I would give to myself, like, I don't want to say something like, oh, like, you're worth it, but like, it's true. Like, you are enough. No matter what somebody says to you, you are enough, just how you show up in today. And also I would say, like, Max, like, don't give up on yourself, because I almost did. And I had reached a point that was so low in my life that I had nowhere to go but up. And that was so powerful for me and so wonderful for me, because I got back to the place that I was when I was that 4-year-old boy, where I was unapologetic, I was being authentic 24/7, There is joy to experience in life. Even after you experience trauma and discrimination and stigma, you can still find that joy and that power, and I found that through art and community.